Monetary Fund. Iran's inflation rate around 50% in the year of 2025. Around 4 million Iranians have left the country in the past decade. The Iranian rial has also suffered a dramatic collapse in value, losing over 97% of its purchasing power against the US dollar in 1 year, becoming increasingly unreliable for international trade. At the same time, rising sanctions, regime oppression, unemployment, and economic instability continue to push more young Iranians to leave the country. But there is one detail that makes all of this even more shocking. Iran was once not just rich. It is considered by many the first superpower in history. It had around 44% of world population under its control, making it the largest empire by relative population that ever existed, according to Guinness World Records. This is the country that gave the world algebra, refinement of the chess game, and the poetry. This is a country with the second largest natural gas reserves on Earth and the fourth largest oil reserves. A country of 90 million people, sitting on a geographic crossroads between East and West. And yet, it cannot freely sell its own oil. It cannot access the global banking system. So what happened? Today, we are going to find out. To understand modern Iran, you have to go back, way back. Iran, historically known as Persia, was for thousands of years one of the wealthiest and most powerful civilizations in the world. The Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BC, stretched from Greece to India. This was the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. As was said, the first superpower. For millennia, Persia sat at the center of the Silk Road, the trade network connecting Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, and China. Merchants, ideas, and wealth flowed through Iranian cities for centuries. Fast forward to the 20th century. In 1908, something was discovered under Iranian soil that would change the country's fate forever: oil. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which would later become BP, began extracting Iranian oil and selling it to the world. But here's the critical part. Iran received almost none of the profit. The British government, which owned a majority stake in the company, pocketed the vast majority of the revenue from Iranian resources. This wasn't a business deal. It was extraction. It was colonial economics on Iranian soil, and the Iranian people knew it. By 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh became Prime Minister of Iran. He was a lawyer, a Democrat, and a nationalist, and he did something that shocked the world. He nationalized Iranian oil. He told Britain and the world that Iran's oil belonged to Iranians. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was out. The National Iranian Oil Company was in. The reaction from the West was immediate and brutal. Britain imposed an embargo on Iranian oil. The United States and the UK organized a coup d'etat, Operation Ajax, that overthrew Mossadegh in 1953. He was replaced by Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the king, who was far more aligned with Western interests. Now, under the Shah, Iran did experience economic growth. The 1960s and especially the 1970s saw massive oil revenues flow into the country. The Shah launched a modernization program. Factories were built, universities were opened, women's rights expanded, literacy rates climbed. Between 1963 and 1977, Iran's GDP grew at an average of over 10% per year. Iranians in the upper and middle classes had a high standard of living. Tehran was a city of nightclubs, universities, and foreign investment. But underneath all that progress was something deeply dangerous. The wealth was extremely unequal. The rural poor saw almost none of the oil money. Political repression was brutal. The Shah's secret police savaged, jailed, and tortured dissidents. And the economy, despite all the growth, was becoming dangerously dependent on oil. By the late 1970s, frustration had reached a boiling point. Religious conservative, leftist, nationalists, and the urban poor united around one figure, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah. Millions of people flooded the streets. The monarchy fell, and Iran transformed into an Islamic republic, a theocratic government unlike anything the world had seen before. The economic consequences were immediate and devastating. Thousands of educated professionals, engineers, doctors, lawyers, academics, fled the country. Foreign investment collapsed overnight. The United States imposed sanctions almost immediately after American diplomats were taken hostage in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Then, barely a year after the revolution, came something even worse, an invasion from its neighbor, Iraq. In 1980, Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein and quietly supported by the United States, invaded Iran. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 brutal years. An estimated 500,000 to 1 million people died. The economy was devastated. Oil infrastructure was bombed. Government resources were consumed entirely by the war effort. By the time the war ended in 1988, Iran was economically exhausted, heavily indebted, and isolated. Here's where Iran's story diverges from other economic collapses, and where it becomes truly unique. Most economic crises are caused by internal failures, mismanagement, corruption, dependence on a single commodity. Iran has all of those. But Iran also has something almost no other country has faced: one of the most comprehensive sanctions regimes in modern history. It started with the 1979 embassy crisis, but escalated dramatically in the 2000s and 2010s, when the international community became alarmed about Iran's nuclear program. The United States, the European Union, and the United Nations imposed layer after layer of restrictions. Iranian banks were cut off from the swift global financial system, meaning Iran could not easily send or receive international payments. Iranian oil exports were targeted directly. Companies doing business with Iran faced massive penalties. The impact was staggering. Between 2012 and 2015, Iran's oil exports fell from approximately 2.5 million barrels per day to less than 1 million. Oil revenues, which had been funding the government budget, collapsed by more than half. The rial crisis didn't start last year. In 2012 alone, it lost over 80% of its value in a single year. Inflation spiked. Businesses that relied on imported components or materials suddenly couldn't afford to operate. Now, and this is important, the Iranian government and its defenders argue that the economic problems are caused almost entirely by external sanctions. Imperialist pressure, they say, economic warfare. And critics of the Iranian government argue the opposite: that sanctions are a response to real threats, and that internal corruption and mismanagement are the true cause of suffering. The honest answer? Both are true, and that is what makes Iran's situation so tragic and so complex. Let's talk about Iran's relationship with oil, because it mirrors something we have seen before. Iran has the 4th largest proven oil reserves in the world and the 2nd largest natural gas reserves. On paper, this should make it one of the richest countries on earth. Instead, the economy has become completely structured around extracting and selling this one resource. When oil revenues are high, the government spends. When they fall, or when sanctions block exports, the entire economy contracts. The same phenomenon that trapped Venezuela, Nigeria, Angola, and others. When one sector generates all the income, everything else atrophies. Manufacturing becomes uncompetitive. Agriculture is neglected. Technology and innovation don't develop because they don't need to. The oil is always there, or it's supposed to be. Iran's non-oil private sector has been consistently squeezed between two pressures. On one side, government-linked companies and Revolutionary Guard control conglomerates that dominate the economy. On the other side, the inability to access foreign markets, financing, or technology due to sanctions. The result? A vibrant, educated population. Iran has one of the highest rates of university graduates in the Middle East, trapped in an economy that cannot fully employ or reward them. And so they leave. Iran is experiencing one of the most severe brain drains of any country in the world. Doctors, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, educated young Iranians are leaving at an alarming rate to Canada, Germany, the United States, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates. The Iranian parliament itself has acknowledged the problem. Various estimates suggest Iran loses between 150,000 and 180,000 educated professionals every year. Think about what that means. The country is producing talent and then exporting it, not oil products, human capital. A 2023 study ranked Iran among the top 5 countries globally for net immigration of highly educated workers. This is not just an economic loss. It is a generational wound. The reasons are not hard to understand. Limited job opportunities, international isolation that blocks career growth, social restrictions, political repression, economic uncertainty, inflation that erodes salaries. Young Iranians with degrees and ambitions look at the world, and they leave. In 2015, there was a moment of genuine hope. The United States, the European Union, Russia, China, and Iran signed a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for significant sanctions relief. The economic impact was immediate. Oil exports rebounded. Foreign companies, from Total to Airbus to Volkswagen, began negotiating deals with Iranian partners. The rial stabilized, inflation dropped, GDP growth returned. For a brief window, Iranians could imagine integration into the global economy. Then, in 2018, the United States under President Donald Trump withdrew from the deal unilaterally and reimposed the harshest sanctions yet, what the administration called maximum pressure. The economy imploded, the rial collapsed again, inflation returned, oil exports were strangled. By 2020, inflation reached 40%. By some estimates, it touched nearly 50% in 2022 and 2023. The years of hardship that followed, combined with ongoing political repression, exploded into mass protests in 2022, triggered by the death of Mahsa Amini immorality, police custody. The slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom" spread across Iran and around the world. The government suppressed the protests violently. Hundreds were killed, thousands were arrested, and the economic crisis continued. Let's look at what the numbers actually say. The Iranian rial, which traded at roughly 10,000 to the US dollar in 2010, now trades at over 1,316,000 to the dollar. That is a currency that has lost approximately 99% of its value in 14 years. Iran's GDP, which was over $700 billion at its peak in 2011, fell to under $300 billion in dollar terms by 2026, according to IMF, a collapse of 57%. And while Iran has found ways to sell oil to China in defiance of sanctions, the economy remains fragile and deeply distorted. Youth unemployment officially stands at around 24%. But economists who study Iran suggest a real figure, accounting for underemployment and people who stop looking for work, is significantly higher. And inflation? The IMF projects Iran's inflation to remain among the highest in the world through the mid-2020s. Meanwhile, the government controls enormous portions of the economy through entities linked to the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, and through state-owned enterprises. Private businesses struggle to compete, struggle to access financing, and struggle to import the materials they need. Iran now has 11 universities listed in the QS World University Rankings, up from just 6 in 2020. The University of Tehran alone jumped nearly 200 places in 6 years, now sitting at 322nd in the world. Sharif University of Technology, Amerikabir, and Iran University of Science and Technology are all recognized as pillars of engineering and scientific output. And the students coming out of these institutions are genuinely world-class. Iranian engineers work at NASA. Iranian mathematicians win the field's medal, the highest honor in mathematics. Iranian doctors run hospital departments across Europe and North America. But here is the thing. Those people are not in Iran. Iran tops world rankings in one category above all others: brain drain. Nearly 150,000 educated. Iranians are estimated to leave every year. The country is essentially running one of the most efficient talent export operations in the world, training engineers, doctors, and scientists at great cost, and then watching them board a plane to Toronto, Berlin, or Houston. Think about the absurdity of that for a moment. A university system that is genuinely improving, producing graduates recognized worldwide, feeding an economy that cannot absorb them. It is not that Iran lacks the human capital to build something different. It is that the system was never designed to use it. An economy dominated by state-linked conglomerates and Revolutionary Guard control companies does not reward a brilliant engineer. It rewards proximity to power. Iran is oil. Iran is gas. Iran has people. What it has lacked for decades across different governments is a combination of internal reform and external reconciliation necessary to unlock that potential. The story of Iran's economy is not simple. It is not just a story of government failure, though there has been failure. It is not just a story of Western interference, though there has been interference. It is not just a resource curse, though that curse is real. It is all of those things layered on top of each other, reinforcing each other, making each problem harder to solve. What happened in Iran is a warning, not about one political system or one ideology, but about what happens when a nation becomes trapped between external pressure and internal rigidity, between a government that cannot reform and a world that will not engage. The rial, once a stable currency in one of the world's great civilizations, is today worth less than the paper it is printed on. A country that was once a crossroads of the ancient world, that gave humanity art, science, poetry, and philosophy, now watches its most talented people board planes and build their futures somewhere else.